Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am not sitting in front of my movie corner. I have my Star Wars The Force Awakens t-shirt on, and judging by the frame around me, I'm not sitting in front of my movie wall. I'm actually out of town. And so basically what I'm doing is, this is going to be my short version of the comparison between Denis Villeneuve's 2021 and 2024 Dune movies, okay, Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, and the 84 Lynch and 2000 Harrison miniseries. I kind of wanted to do this video to kind of show what are some of the points that make the movie interesting. So what are some of the points where people, see things, do things, and how does that make up, like what parts did Villeneuve use from either one, and then what ones actually were maybe just him doing this. Just kind of mentioning some things right off. One of the first things that stood out to me when I started watching the 1984 David Lynch version was his design for the Sardaukar. The Sardaukar in that film had these sort of like masks that were almost like hazmat suits. They had like little windows, and then they had like, he had some gas kind of around them so that it kind of obscured the plate, kind of obscured the face. And the Sardaukar that we see in the 2021 version is very much like that. Now, in the John Harrison version, the Sardaukar had a little like brand or like a little mark at the base of their hairline that basically, like, it was like a little V, like a little like a little V. People could see that and then they would go, "Oh, Sardaukar." So in the 2021 version of Dune, they all had like these tattoos right above their eye, which I think was their rank. Like how many dots is, whatever rank you were. Also, in the way that they wore their uniforms, their kind of bulbous, kind of head gear, was very reminiscent of the 1984 David Lynch version. They're very similar in that respect. Okay. Also, I happen to notice, because I have the extended version in the Steelbook of David Lynch's Dune. The extended version was not directed by David Lynch. He asked to have his name removed from that because he was like, "Hey, it's not mine. I'm disowning this." So they made it from a thing called Alan Smithy. It's a person that they made up when a director doesn't want to do some kind of a director's cut or wants to do something different. Then they will come in and they will do something about that. So, interestingly enough, in one of those extended scenes, Dr. Kynes is invited to the Atreides palace, and Dr. Yue goes, "Hey, you being the Emperor's man, you probably shouldn't be seen with us Atreides," and he's like, "On second thought, I feel very comfortable here." And then he proposes an alliance between the Atreides and the Fremen. And to cement that alliance, he spits on the floor. And then I think there's a mention made of how precious water is, because some of the Duke's guys are like, "What the hell?" And they're like, "Remember, water's precious here." This is something out of the book. And then Duke Leto is pouring his water onto the floor. And in the reflection of that, you get to see the first moon, which is known as the hand of God. It looks like the big hand, almost like a white hand of Sauron. But it's dark because it's the moon, not just like sticking white pigment on a shield. So that was interesting to me because having never really seen that in the David Lynch version until the extended version, when I saw 2021's Dune, I don't know if I mentioned that in my original comparison, that was something that David Lynch had in his, and that is something that Denis Villeneuve put in his. Now, one of the things that that they did is when Paul and Jessica are being taken out of Arrakeen to go die in the desert in the first part of David Lynch's, we see Duncan Idaho come in and he stabs the Sardaukar guy, and he's like telling the guys, hey, go check down there. You guys go check down there. And then he puts on his little shield and he runs and he jumps into a group of Sardaukar, and then a Sardaukar shoots a Hunter Seeker and it goes through and then it hits him in the head and we see him die. In the 2000 Harrison version, we see Duncan's death. It happens with Kynes after Paul and Jessica are dumped in the desert. Then they go and you see Duncan says, I'm going to remain with the Fremen as I promised your father, and then we see him die. Almost off screen. It's like some things happen, so a thing blows up and then he kind of flies off and dies. In the new one, in the 2021 version of Dune, we see Duncan die as Paul and Jessica are trying to escape from the Sardaukar attack on the weather station. Similar to what we see in the 2000 Harrison version. And then we see them escape into a storm after that rescue. So that is something that was very much shades of Harrison. Okay, the way that Duncan dies, the way that Paul and Jessica escape into the storm, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah. Now, one of the things that we see, this was something that I kind of wanted to make note of when I was actually, this is what I wanted to kind of talk about the most, was more of the second half of 84 Lynch, and then kind of the second half of the miniseries. Even though the miniseries was split into 3, you could kind of take it from the point where, Paul and Jessica meet up with the Fremen, and then, Paul fights Jamis, and then from about there, you could take it out, and then that's kind of where they pick up in Denis Villeneuve's. So one of the things that they did, both in the 2000 Dune and in the 84 Dune, Jamis's burial, where they talk about, he carried 33 liters of the tribe's water, stuff like that. One of the things that we didn't get, and this was something that I was kind of, I think actually it was in my second half of notes. In the book, after Jamis is buried, okay, after he's, after his water is taken out, they bring it to him. They say, he carried, this many liters of the tribe's water. And in the 84 Lynch, they actually have the little water tokens that he puts on, that they put together, and then they put it on, and then he actually hangs it on Paul's neck. In the book, those water tokens are actually used in a courtship ritual because Paul doesn't know what to do with them. And so he asks Chani, can you carry these for me? And Chani kind of like looks up at Stilgar like, what? And Stilgar's like, he doesn't know our ways. And Paul's like, water rings must symbolize a courtship ritual then? Okay. So, yeah, it's like one of those things that's how Fremen court each other, is they give the water rings to the other people. Kind of similar how we give wedding rings, or we give rings to people. This is not my wedding ring, by the way. This is just a ring, but I'm just using it as an illustration point of we give rings to people for a pledge. And they're in kind of the same way. to not give themselves away, you give your water rings to a person, and that's your bond between the two of you. Some things are a little different because in some of the newer books, some of those rituals change a little bit. Like, for instance, the Fremen also had a ritual of like a race. So Liet and a blood brother of his in House Harkonnen have to race across the desert to get to a certain sietch to get the girl, okay? And he doesn't make it, but I think something happens to his blood brother, and I'm right there in the book, so I'm not sure exactly because it's been a long time since I've read this. One of the reasons why I'm reading it again. So trying to get back into that, trying to read that. And we missed this scene in the original because they cut the Jamis fight, and then they cut the part where Jamis' water is taken out. And then we see Hera come in with the sons of Jamis, right? And they stick the little knife in there, and they do all that kind of stuff. And then they stick the guy in there, and then they pour out the water, and then basically Stilgar puts all the water rings on, and then he hangs it on Paul's neck. And that's when he says, I'll make you Usul, you're the strength of the base of the pillar, and then I will call you, but you must choose a name that we will call you openly as Fremen. So he says, may I be known as Paul Muad'Dib. So we see that, right? And then after that, they take them down into the thing. We see them go from, they find the Fremen, okay? Paul knocks out Jamis. That's the guy that he knocks out. So if you've never seen the extended version, you've only ever seen the theatrical version. The man that Paul just completely splays out in that scene is Jamis, okay? When they first meet up with the Fremen and then he runs up the hillside, okay? That's Jamis, okay? And then he's like, I declare the Amtal rule. And that's kind of, and we actually see that in the new film. We actually see when they're taking Jamis' body, they have his crysknife on his chest, and when they get back to Sietch Tabr, they place Jamis in this big kind of a tent thing, and then they place these like almost look like electrodes, but they're like pumps, and they stick them into his chest, and then that pumps all the water out of his body, okay? Which is very similar to what they did in the 84 Lynch version. If you watch the extended version, here again, you have to watch the extended version to understand that. And then that's when they go down to the Knat. That's when they actually go out to that big thing. And that's what you see when you see in the Lynch version, when they walk down and she's like, moisture. And then they come in and he's like, water, millions of decaliters. That's that Knat. And then they actually, in the extended version, they actually show them pouring the water into that reservoir, okay? And that's what we see is when, in the new film, okay, not Paul, but Jessica is brought into the Knat, and she actually sees that. And she's actually like, whoa, like, there's millions of souls of dead Fremen here. And he's like, yes. He's like, this water, he's like, the thirstiest Fremen, because this is right out of the book. He says, the thirstiest Fremen has been walking through the desert for 3 days, would not think to come in here and take from this water because it is sacred to us. And you're thinking, oh yeah, that does make sense, because they value water over everything. And water theft is something that is like, if you do it, okay, you are lower than pond scum in their eyes. You are the lowest of the low if you are a water thief. They will cast you out in the desert for that. It is not cool. One of the things that we got to see a little bit of was some raids in the new version, okay? We see some raiding and some montages of raids going on to kind of show the passage of time. And we see a little bit of that, because we've seen that in the 2000 Harrison version, and we saw that in the 84 Lynch. We also see that in the new Denis Villeneuve in Part 2. So there is a little bit of that goes on, which I thought was actually kind of interesting to see how they were going to handle that, and they handled it pretty well. again, I talked about this in my review. Um, Let me see. Let me go. Excuse me. Let me see here. Okay. Let's talk about Jessica Takes the Water of Life. Okay. Let's let's kind of compare and contrast that Water of Life scene. In the 2000 Dune miniseries, it's Jessica takes it. It's very trance-like, very drug-like. Okay, the place terrifying to us, to women, is it's almost like a nexus in time that's like kind of swirling around her, and she starts to reach out for it, but then she kind of pulls her hand back like, oh my god, that's not where I'm supposed to go. And Mother Ramallo kind of puts her hands on Jessica's shoulder and says, you cannot go there. That is the place we cannot look. And in the 84 Dune, and then of course she transmutes, she gets everything, and then all of a sudden you get the whole scene of her going like, oh my god, you're pregnant. Holy mothers, what have we done? You know. And then she says, you must take you must take your daughter into your arms. She must see all that we can see, so that, doesn't drive her mad. Like, you can calm her down because of what's happening here. And this is actually called out in Dune Messiah, by Bronso of Ix. I read that in my in my the problem with Dune Part 2 and Dune Part 3, if they decide to do it, doing the jihad thing. Because the guy from CBR is an idiot because he didn't understand anything. Now, in the 84 version of Dune, when Jessica takes the Water of Life, it's almost like an agony thing. Like, she is screaming at the top of her lungs. Gaius Helen Mohayim also mentions the place terrifying to women. But it's not shown during the scene. It's just told to Paul early on, and then Paul experiences it later when he does his Water of Life. This is not actually mentioned in the 2024 Dune Part 2. It's not really shown, this place terrifying to women. Okay? It's hinted at in Part 1 when she talks about the Kwisatz Haderach. When he's like, oh, you're just looking for a person. And she goes, a mind who can do things and bridge things that we cannot. Because it is revealed in the novelization. Okay, because I was just reading this not about 2 weeks before I saw this movie. About a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. I was watching, reading through Dune. And I was watching I have notes. I was watching through the 2000 miniseries. I was watching through the 84 Lynch. I watched Dune Part 1 with my girlfriend in preparation for coming and watching Dune Part 2 while I'm visiting her. And you find out from the book that the place that is terrifying to women is because women have this instance of, like, he explains it as like, men are the givers, women are the takers. And inside men and women, there is the opposite place. So there's like, women are the takers, men are the givers, and inside of men, there's a place where the taking happens. And inside of women, there's a place where the giving happens. And it's terrifying to them because they don't know. It's a foreign concept to them, basically, is how Frank puts it. Now, I could be wrong about that. It could be the opposite. You can correct me down in the comments if you want. I don't care. My point is that this has always been speculated at in the media. How do we show this? The thing that happens is that the Kwisatz Haderach was the one who could bridge the giving and the taking. Yet Paul understands his role as, I am the fulcrum, the giver and the taker. Okay? basically being that he is the whirlwind, okay? That, you know, he basically, I think he explains it to the way that Harrison explained it was he had Reverend Mother Ramallo, before Jessica takes the water of life, come to him in a vision and say, you are the, when religion and politics are riding the same cart, the whirlwind follows. You are the Kwisatz Haderach, boy. You are the whirlwind. Paul explains to his mother that when religion and politics ride that same cart, the whirlwind follows, and he's like, I, as the Kwisatz Haderach, am that whirlwind. Okay? And in the 2000, or in the 1984 Dune, the water of life, when Paul takes it, again, it's like that sort of drug, it's like that sort of agony thing. And Paul kind of like looks at the place where the navigators occupy. And that's how Lynch kind of explains. He's like, this is the place terrifying to women. And I'm like, and after reading through the novel 1,000 times now, I mean, I've read through it so many times, I've lost track. But after reading through it so many times, I understand that that's not the place, folks. The place that's terrifying to women is a place deep in their subconscious, okay, that's foreign to them, and therefore it's terrifying to them, okay? They absolutely cannot understand the difference, okay? Now, let's talk about in the 2000 Dune. Now, this was something that was a little absent from David Lynch's version, and I put it mostly down as I mostly put it down as the 2000 Dune. The religious aspect of the Fremen that was present in the book, words like Bila Kaifa, Gudachar Mantani during Jamas's funeral, religious gestures, things like when they meet each other, they do that whole thing where they pull their hands up and they go like this, or they bow and they go like this. There's the Siege orgy after the Water of Life, which was something that they didn't show in the 2024 Dune Part 2, which I think, honestly, trying to keep the movie PG-13, you wouldn't have been able to show that, because I know they had to cut some of that for broadcast. If you bought the special edition 3-disc DVD of the Dune miniseries from 2000, you'll notice that, like, there's a tiny bit of nudity in it. It's very subtle, but it was parts that were cut from the original broadcast, okay? And there was also scenes that were cut from the original broadcast for time and pacing reasons that were added back into this special edition. That is something that absolutely Denis Villeneuve leaned into, because there was like there was some parts where, like, he says, like Stilgar says, Bila Kaifa, and it says Amen, So that was kind of their Amen. There were things that he mentioned that were part of the book that were religious aspects of things, stuff like that really kind of leaned heavily into that aspect. Now, let's talk about the reunion of Gurney really quick. In the 2000 Dune, the reunion of Gurney and Paul, there was a false spice patch. Okay, after Paul gets done riding the worm, there's a false spice patch that they plant to lure in the smugglers because they think it's Harkonnens. And then he's just about to stab Othium, and Paul's like, "Put the knife away, Gurney Halleck." And then he's like, "Who is it that knows the name of Gurney Halleck?" And then Paul pulls down his hood and reveals himself, and he's like, "Paul? Is it truly Paul?" And then they run and they embrace, and he's like, "You young pup." And then he mentions that he has a son, and there was some other things that happened. In the 84 Dune, how they come together is during the montage of them attacking the different Harkonnens. In one scene, Paul and Stilgar running through the desert, And Stilgar goes, "We surprised a band of smugglers," or no, Paul says, "We surprised a band of smugglers," and and Stilgar goes, "Too bad, I thought they were Harkonnens," and then it's like, and then Paul like sees Gurney running along, and he's like, "Gurney," and then Gurney stops, and then he's like, you know, he's like, "Paul," he's like, he's like, "You have no need of your weapons with me, Gurney Halleck." He's like, "Paul, they said you were dead. They said you were," and then he holds up, and then he's like, "Don't you trust your own eyes?" And then he holds up his finger with the Tuchel signet ring on it, and he's like, and then he's like, "You young pup," and he grabs him, and they start hugging it out. And we get no mention of the son or anything like that, and that's something that doesn't happen. So here again, the reunion of Gurney is kind of a mix between the two. There was shades of Lynch, but there was also shades of Harrison. The shades of Harrison were they dropped the spice carrier on the sand, okay, and Gurney comes up out of it, and he drops down to the sand, and he walks through the head of the harvester, and then the guys pop up and they start attacking them, and then that's like, and Paul's like kicking the crap out of Gurney, and then it's like he gets right down on him, and he's like, "I hear your steps, old man." Very much so from the first part where he's like, "I could tell it was you by your footsteps, Gurney," and that kind of stuff. Which was very interesting. I absolutely love that reunion scene, especially when he gets back up and then he pulls down his thing, and then he's like, he realizes, he's like, "Paul, you young pup," and he just runs up and grabs onto him. So that part was very, very good. Very well done. Now, I'm going to mention something that I didn't pick up on in the first couple of watches of Dune. It wasn't until after I had seen the 84 Lynch version that I was watching 2021 Dune with my girlfriend that I suddenly realized that when Paul and Jessica come out of the rocks after they leave the storm, and they crash land, and then they change into their still suits, okay? And it's right before then they go from the rocks, and then they go out, and then he's like, when they're kind of getting ready to go out, to go across, and she's like, "I can see greenery over there," and all that kind of stuff. There's kind of a sunset area. When they step out onto that rock, you can kind of hear some of Brian Eno's prophecy theme. Go back and take a listen. It is crazy. I was like, no flipping way. That is interesting. All right. Then I had a bunch of stuff from the 2000 miniseries. Now, this I mentioned in my review, and I'm going to mention it here again. The 2000 Dune had Fade's 100th gladiatorial kill. Okay, that was not actually shown on screen. It was actually done off screen. We see Fade training for it, and then we see some things happening. But we didn't actually get to see it on screen. We saw him fight a slave once, kind of, I think it's in the first part, when Raban is like, Leto is growing more popular with every passing week. We see him fight it. We see Fade fight a slave. And we see him training to fight when Irulan comes to visit. She mentions the birthday celebration. That's something that Margot Fenring kind of mentions about Fade, is that this was a birthday celebration from the uncle to Fade. So that's, that's kind of what they do. Now, this was kind of implied, but not really brought out in 2024 Dune Part 2, was that there was a Sardaukar who was a part of Gurney's smuggler band and was sent back to the Emperor at the last battle. That did not happen in this one. It's implied that the Fremen don't trust the band of smugglers because there could be spies among them. Okay? And that's something that the Fremen kind of lean into when Paul and Jessica first get back to Siege Tabor. That's one of the first things that like the Fremen is like. He's like, "You are spies. We don't want you here." And then Gurney also threatened Jessica, but this was something that Denis Villeneuve did not do. was Gurney threatening Jessica. That was in the book. It was in the 2000 miniseries, but that was something that Denis Villeneuve completely went away from. In fact, there's a point at which they're heading back and they're heading down to the south, and Gurney's like, "I'm coming with you, my lord," and he's like, "No, you go protect my mother." And then you see Gurney kind of go, "Oh, yes, sir, my lord Duke," and he takes off to go with Chani to go back to help Jessica. Now, in the 2000 Dune, Paul kind of waited until the last part to kind of reveal his Kwisatz Haderach-ness. In 2021 Dune, he knew from the test. This was something that was also done in 84. Dune, Kwisatz Haderach was revealed from very early on. The Reverend Mother tells Paul very early on that the Kwisatz Haderach is there. The 84 Dune was very much a messianic, like, Superman for Paul. Like, he was just like, as soon as he got on Arrakis and he got out with the Fremen, he was just like, "I'm the Kwisatz Haderach, look at me! Long live the fighters, I'm the man, woo!" It's not what he did, okay? In 2000 Dune, Paul kind of knew what his role was. He knew that the Jihad was coming. Harrison made that much clear from the Sea Georgie scene, where Paul kind of like sees that he's got blood on his hands. He's like, "Oh," and then he wakes up. And that was kind of the end of the second part. And then he shows his mother later on that the Jihad is coming. And he says, "A terrible purpose awaits us, mother. The sleeper has awakened, and anyone who tries to stop it will be crushed." And she's like, "Even the innocents." And then he's like, "There are no innocents, anymore." Now, interestingly enough, Paul has a prescient vision early on in the book at the end of the first part, where he sees a lot of things, and then he basically like reveals to his mother that Baron Harkonnen was her father. Okay, he's like, "I'm his grandson," and then at the very end, when they're getting ready to leave the tent to head off into the desert, he says, "And now Harkonnens shall kill Harkonnens." That was something that they didn't really reveal in the actual 84 Dune. They didn't reveal that at all. Like, you didn't know unless you read the book. But when Paul takes the water of life, let's talk about that for a minute. In the 2000 Dune, like the book, because Harrison was following the book as closely as possible, he uses that as sort of the impetus when Gurney threatens Jessica. He's like, "Huh, that's not good. I didn't see that coming." And he actually, in the book, he goes down immediately and takes the water of life. In the 2000 miniseries, Gurney goes and does his after he takes it, Paul sends Chani into the desert with their son, and then he goes back to Sietch Tabr and takes the water of life. Now, when he takes the water of life, it's very like his mother, very druggish, very dreamlike, hypnotic. He's kind of like, kind of thing. And he faints, and then Othium finds him, and that's how they kind of go from there. In the 84 Dune, Paul just goes out in the middle of the desert with Chani and with his Fedaykin, or I guess if you want to say, in the 2000 miniseries they say Fedaykin, but it's not actually Fedaykin, it's Fedaykin. And that's actually the pronunciation that they use in the 2024 version. It's actually called Fedaykin. Now, and then he also screams in agony. Plus, like, when he takes it, he has like a bloody tear that like falls down. I know it's like people are going to start humming Bloody Tears from Castlevania, but he has a bloody tear that rolls down his cheek, and then like Gaius, Helen, Mohayim, his mother, and Alia have like blood pouring from their nose. Not sure exactly why. Now, in the 2000 Dune miniseries, after Chani helps Jessica wake Paul up, because in the one, the sandworm, in the 84 Lynch, the sandworms just come out, and then Paul just gets up and says, "Father, the sleeper has awakened," and that's it. That's the end of it. And they just go right to the next scene where they're going to go beat the Emperor. In 2000 Dune, Paul explains what he is to Jessica. In the 2024 part 2, Paul mostly just kind of explains to his mother what's going on. Now, he sees Alia during a dream sequence on the beach, and she's talking to him and saying, "I can help you understand the water of life. I can help you understand different things because you and I are very much alike in that I'm pre-born, you're the Kwisatz Haderach, we're very much alike in terms of our powers." There was another thing that happened where when Paul was out of it in the 2000 miniseries, the guys were saying "Ya Ya Yawam," which is something that's, again, out of the book. And then, like, and this was something interesting, is that, like, when the guys are saying "Long live the fighters of Muad'Dib," they say "Ya Sham Wada," which I believe translates somewhat to "Long live the fighters." Okay. And we actually hear Paul say this in the 2024 Dune Part 2. He's like, "Ya Sham Wada," and it's really cool. Now, the line, "He who can destroy a thing controls a thing," actually comes out at the beginning of the film. It actually says, "He who can control the spice controls the universe." And that was actually something that they were doing. And then that was something that that Paul says to the Holy Warriors when he first meets them in the 84 Lynch version. He's like, he's like, "I am Usul, Paul Muad'Dib." He's like, "We will, kill all the Harkonnens and take them to task and blah, blah, blah." And then after the final battle, he's like, "He who can destroy a thing controls a thing." Now, interestingly enough, we don't actually see Paul put the skull of his father in the shrine like we do in the 2000 miniseries. We actually see Paul taking his father's shrine with some of his torn clothing and putting it into the thing, and then he puts a little rock in front of it and says, "Let all Fremen who pass here stop and pay homage to the shrine of Duke Leto." And the in this one, we actually see in a trance that he has, because Paul has a ton of trances in this one because the spice is everywhere and it's affecting him. It's, affecting his prescient ability, and so he's like seeing things and hearing things and doing things, and so he spends a lot of his time like seeing the future, and he sees his father's skull in like a little alcove with a picture of his father below it. Which is kind of interesting, not gonna lie. because he's not actually, like, he didn't actually go there and put his father's skull. They didn't actually show, like, them getting his father's skull or anything like that. So, kind of interesting. Now, in the Fedaykin, getting back to that, here again, in the 84 Lynch version, they say it Fedaykin. And they actually draw it out, they say the Fedaykin. Stilgar actually says that to him. Now, in the 2000, they say it Fedaykin. Okay? Now, in the 84 Dune, they're actually Paul's bodyguards. He actually says, and this is actually from the book, he says, these are 15 of our, best warriors to serve you as your guard. And then he's like rubbing like red paint or something on their shoulder pads, and then he holds out his hand and he goes, the Fedaykin. In the 2000 Dune, they're actually more the Holy Warriors. The actual, like, who Paul and Jessica train in the Bene Gesserit way, okay? So there's that, too, okay? And then, of course, I mentioned this before, in the 84 Lynch version, Paul never learns of his heritage. In the 2000 Dune, Paul learns this after taking the Water of Life. He calls Fade cousin, which is actually something that actually happens in the final battle. I mentioned that in my review. In the 2024 version of Dune Part 2, he actually says, he's like, shall we dance, cousin? And Fade goes, cousin, I like that. Ooh, killed a lot of family members. It'd be a pleasure to kill you too, Austin Butler did a really good job. He was really menacing. Not as campy as Matt Kieslar, but definitely not as hammed up as Sting. It was kind of right in the middle. It was very well done. Now, Alia calls the Baron grandfather after she stabs Ian McNeice in the 2000 Dune. She stabs him across the hand, and he goes, and then she's like, goodbye, grandfather. You finally met the Atreides Gom Jabbar. And then she throws the little ring down on the ground. And then in the chaos and confusion of the battle, she escapes into out of the Emperor's thing. We know from my review in 2024, Paul actually walks up to the Baron, because Alia isn't born. Strange choice, not gonna lie. And actually goes, hello, grandfather. And then sticks the knife into him. Okay. Let me see. Yeah, in the 2000 Dune, it shows the death of Paul and Chani's son. Fade also called Canley. And that was something that, and then that was something that, like, kind of made Paul have to fight Fade. In the 84 Lynch, Fade just goes, when Gaius Helen Mohiam kind of threatens Paul, which actually happens in the 2024 version too, he goes, like, he says, silence, and he's like, I remember your Gom Jabbar, now you'll remember mine. I can kill with a word. And then one of the Fremen goes, and his word will carry death eternal to those who stand against the righteous. And then Fade goes, the righteous? And then it's like Paul goes, there's a Harkonnen among you. And then he says, give the Harkonnen a blade and let him stand forth. And then the Emperor says, if Fade wishes it, he can meet you with my blade in his hand. He's like, oh, I wish it. So that was kind of how that happens. In the 2024 Dune Part 2, as I discussed in my review, Paul basically just walks up to the Emperor and says, choose your champion. And Fade basically walks up and is like, haha, I will be his champion. And then that's when they fight. Yeah, and that was pretty much it, what I had for that. So again, what I'm going to do is, after the DVD for this drops, I'm going to watch all of them again. I'm going to do a retrospective where I'm going to talk about the 84 Lynch, the 2000 Harrison, and the 2003 Children of Dune miniseries. And I will talk about Dune Parts 1 and 2. And I will kind of do a retrospective. And then I'm also going to do a full-on comparison where I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have a bunch of categories, okay, of different scenes from the book, because I'll read the book again. I'll do some different categories, and then I will put down, what did Lynch do? What did Harrison do? What did Denis Villeneuve do? How did this happen? How did that happen? Blah, 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 blah. These were just things that I felt were kind of highlight scenes from the book that I think people would be interested in seeing. I can talk more in depth about things later because I'm probably going to do it in a huge, like about 2 or 3 parts, because it's going to take me a while to get through it. Okay? So smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you thought of this video and my other Dune videos as well. And as we say, I will be getting back to my regularly scheduled programming not this week, but the following week, because I'm still on my personal vacation. And so I will be back next week in my movie corner. I will be doing some apologetic stuff. And then after I get done with that, I will be doing some other movie reviews and some different things like that. I actually saw Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. I want to do a review of that because I think it was actually a lot better than people let on. So, as we say, we will see you on the next one.